Classic Rock 103.7 WHTT.
I hate this station. They always make promises they can't deliver.
Playing the greatest rock and roll hits of all time.
We built this city. See?
Alrighty, what's happening, everyone? Welcome on into the Check Your Brain podcast on this Wednesday. Yes, another free episode. My name is Tony Mazur. Thank you for listening to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you get your finer podcasts. And also, if you're on Twitter at Tony Mazur, that's what I've been. What my friends, even though it's not called Twitter anymore, but my friends would call me a Twitter terrorist. So
you are
follow me over there, and yeah, and if you want more episodes just like this one with maybe a little bit more cursing, more unsavory behavior on my part, go over to Patreon at patreon.com/Tony Mazur. You could subscribe for free. I'm just not going to guarantee you I'm going to give you a lot of episodes for free. I do have a $3, a $5, and a $10 tier. The $10 tier gives you extra podcasts. $5 gives you video. $3 tier just gives you straight audio, but you'll get most episodes anyway. So go over there at patreon.com/Tony Mazur, TonyMazur. Joining me on the show is an old friend of mine dating back a little over 10 years now. He's originally from Chicago. He's down in the Tampa area with a cup of coffee in my neck of the woods of Cleveland, Ohio, and that is Ryan Hoppe. What's going on, man?
What's up, bro? I'm so excited to be on your show, man.
Yeah, you know, it's funny because we've known each other now for a decade and have kept in touch off and on, no matter what's going on various social media or your podcast, which is called Hoppe Hour. You've been doing that for a long time as well. Talk about that really quick. I was like doing it. I always call it the sandwich plugs. I do the beginning part, then we get into everything else, and then we end with the plugs.
It's kind of like a singular morning zoo and a podcast. I began it in May 2015 when I moved to Tampa Bay from Cleveland. I did a show in Chicago called Hoppe and Super Rich with my co-host Ryan Stuppridge, who I have not talked to in 10 years, and we did it at Northwestern University. I essentially pretended to go to that school, and I got on air, and then I did that show for about a year, and then I worked for Rover for a few months, and then when I moved to Tampa, I began the show because my grandma always used to say it's Hoppe Hour, like based off of Happy Hour. So then I began to show then, and it's been a journey, man. It's been crazy.
Yeah, and one thing I got to say for the listening audience right now, and I've always admired Ryan's tenacity of trying to be in this business, this crazy business, a one that honestly, its glory days were long gone by the time I got into radio, and also by the time you got into it too.
Same.
But you were, if I'm not mistaken, you were doing college radio on the weekends in Chicago. Then you would drive overnight. You would take like a dozen Red Bulls and drive overnight to be a phone screener in Independence, Ohio.
Yeah. I also drove 90 minutes to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, after working overnight to produce this brokerage show called America Weekend. But I did that for about 6 months, and that was cool. But yeah, I drove 6 hours. Wow, you actually wow. I'm surprised you remember that. I forgot about driving to Independence, Ohio. You got a really good memory, dude. Everything's been a blur the last 10 years. Yeah, I did do that. I think I got a little bit of sleep. Wow, I'm very impressed you remember. I didn't remember that.
And not only that, you have to cross a time zone.
I would have never remembered that if you had not told me.
Because it was like 11 o'clock p.m. Chicago time, something like that, and you just gassed up the car and jumped right in, took I-80/90 all the way to Cleveland, Ohio.
I think I slept from like 1 to... I got some type of sleep, because if I don't sleep, I am not the same person. And I remember when I was trying out for this show, I got some sort of sleep, but that's pretty accurate. It's weird.
That's it. That's incredible. And this is where the business of radio, and we'll get into it, just media in general, but especially radio. At one time, you honored those people who took the initiative to work for free or very little money. You would drive across long terrains for, like you said, a brokered show. For people who don't know what a brokered show is, it's whoever's on the air, they're trying to sell something, so they sell their own ad time. and they do a radio show for free. They pay the radio station
Yeah.
to put their product on the air. So it's usually like some financial firm, and they're on at 7 o'clock in the morning on Sunday, and they talk about whatever's going on in the business world or something. And then they promote their phone number and their business, and maybe they'll have a special guest in studio, which is the other partner in the law firm or something, and they pay for that airtime. So for you to have gone up to Milwaukee, so you're going up, was that is that 94 to going up
I
to
believe
Milwaukee?
so. It's actually not that far. It's like 90 minutes, but I remember one
No,
time
Kyle
I
Rittenhouse knows about crossing the border between Illinois and Wisconsin. I'm just
yeah,
kidding.
yeah,
I
he
won't get you in
does.
trouble.
But no, it's all good. I don't know. It was crazy. I can't believe I did it. I don't think I could do that anymore. Like the like pulling all-nighters. Like I work with a bunch of 24-year-olds in my current job, and they were like, "Oh, we got an hour of sleep." And I'm like, man, I have not been able to do that in 8 years, 9 years. Crazy.
Yeah, I remember those days of, well, I'm up. I guess I'm gonna stay up. I guess I'll hit the gym, take a little
I can't do that
pre-workout.
anymore, bro.
I can't. No, I can't either. I'm I'm in my mid to late 30s right now, so it's a little bit rougher trying to wake up and trying to be productive. But luckily, I don't work in daily radio anymore. But you still
Yeah.
do, and you've had this love of radio for a long time. I'm pretty sure you started doing some stuff. Your dad, who, by the way, saw your dad passed away 10
Yeah.
years ago around
Crazy.
this time. So
Yeah, it's November is always weird. It's like, damn it, Dad, why'd you have to die on Thanksgiving Eve?
and
Crazy.
your dad was the one who would take you to the radio stations and meet guys like Steve Dahl, Gary Meyer, and all them,
Yeah,
right?
it's true. He was more into old time radio and smooth jazz radio, while I was more into like Mancow, Rover,
Hot
Opie and
talk.
Anthony. He didn't like that, but for some reason, one time he was driving me to an interview and I had Bubba the Love Sponge on, and he loved Bubba. Weirdest thing. He didn't like anybody else, but for some reason, Bubba was cracking him up. Very weird. I mean, I liked Bubba's show back in the day, but it's just weird how this Roman Catholic, out of any show to laugh at, Bubba the Love Sponge is the one making you laugh.
I mean,
Funny.
it's funny. My parents were the same way when it came to different music tastes, but they did like Howard Stern, which is why I got kind of messed up as a kid because that was what I listened
Howard's
to.
very good. I even still listen to him now. I can only listen for about 40 minutes, but he did this thing. He has this quote. He says, "If your humor is all blue, you are dead in the water." And to me, that describes him perfectly, where he can have an intelligent segment and then begin talking about like weird things where it's C tober for like the body organ of a penis. I don't know if I could say that, but like it's just he's
I mean, you can
weird.
say whatever you want in this
Yeah,
podcast.
he has that thing called Cocktober where he has like Richard and Sal do these weird stunts, and I'm like, bro, are you bisexual? Like, not that it matters, but it's like it's always weird how he'll go from a great 40-minute monologue to then being like, oh, whip out your dicks, and I'm like, what? But
Y-
whatever.
Yeah, well, things really changed around that time. Coincidentally, when I got into radio, because I wanted to get in the business of the Opie and Anthony, Howard Stern, Bubba the Love Sponge, the hot talk, the
Yeah.
being raised in the '90s and what it was when we would go to school, and my parents would. My mom would drive me to school, and Howard Stern would be on. They'd start talking about vibrators and lesbians, and it's like, no, we're gonna put Q104 on and put the the whatever 90s pop station Sarah McLachlan on just because it wasn't that, or put the AM station on. Now, as soon as we would get dropped off, my parents would put Howard Stern back on, but
You know who I liked was Lanigan, believe it or not. I used to like that show, Lanigan and Malone.
knuckleheads in the news.
I didn't like that stuff, but I liked when they would just talk. It just was not, it wasn't bad for what it was. When they left, um, Mark Nolan would never look me in the eye when we worked at iHeartMedia. And I was like, bro, you're like a redheaded Alan Cox. Like, what are you doing?
My wife used to work as an intern for I was gonna say Mark Lanigan. No, not Mark Lanigan from the Screaming Trees. John Lanigan. But
I was in the hallway when he walked off his show and quit, when he was doing the
the
spew with
spew.
Triv.
Yeah.
I was in the hallway getting coffee, and he goes, "I'm done," or whatever. And it was weird. Everyone's like, did Lanigan just walk off? So weird that day.
So when you got into radio, the glory days, like I said, were basically over. I started in late 2006, 2007, and I just noticed the sea change was going on. That the well, one form was the political correctness, where it used to be a lot more of the stuffy conservatives, George W.
Yeah.
Bushites, and then you got more of the sensitive liberal types who were complaining about stuff that was going on, and you were seeing mass censorship all over the place that you couldn't talk about certain things. And because of that, the hot talk era of radio went away around that time when Howard Stern went over to Sirius. The but that's what I wanted to get into because anybody knew the writing was on the wall as far as being a music DJ, that you weren't going to get paid $50,000 to $100,000 to spin a couple of records and talk a couple of times an hour, that you were going to have to work multiple radio stations for very little money if you even wanted to retain your status in the business. So you had to I could do a talk show. I can work in sports radio. I can do something like that. So that's where I had to make that transition. By the time you were getting into it in the early to mid 2010s, was this what you were expecting?
Um, I don't know what I was expecting. I think, well, going back to what you're saying about radio changing, to me, the thing that changed radio was Imus getting fired for his comments. That was the game changer.
Yeah, my first year radio. Wonderful.
That the homeless Charlie comments about
Hmm.
Condoleezza Rice with Opie and Anthony, and then the lesser known JV and Elvis comments about Asian people with their prank call. That all happened in '07, and that's kind of when things changed. And I went to a I'm gonna go next year. I go to this thing called the Morning Show Boot Camp, and it's kind of hack, but it's pretty great where you can meet a lot of radio people. And I interned in 2013 and 2014, and I've gone to some of them since, like maybe 5 of them in 12 years. And I began to notice a lot of my heroes, like these guys I looked up to, Brother Weeze, BJ Shea, who are now my friends. And it's like hearing them complain in these panels about radio dying, that was kind of the eye opener for me. Because this was early Spotify. And this was kind of when I was like, what am I getting into? Was when I was listening to radio into 2000 through 2012 when I graduated high school. I had this rose colored glasses of what it was. And then when I was beginning to kind of see radio people complain about it, that was kind of when I wasn't worried, but things definitely changed.
Yeah, the podcast has really changed things. I mean, when a podcast began, when the name was coined, was when iPods were still around, and
It's a weird name. Yeah.
yeah, it was basically used for archived radio shows that you would download onto your iPod. So you would have to go, well, let's see, I can listen to this 1 hour, I guess it's called a podcast, or I can delete my 2 Limp Bizkit albums that I had on there and
Yeah,
maybe have to put
exactly.
them back on later on your iTunes. And that's what it was at the time. And it wasn't a thing for most people who weren't in the know. You had to be a professional, that you were getting into podcasts, that you were working, that you put your little earbuds with the cord and you would go jogging or something and you would listen to, hey, I get an opportunity to listen to this 2 hour radio show with very little to no commercials, and they can curse in it and they can go in different directions, and they don't have to get to the musical guest and the this and the this and the this and the traffic update and the weather update and whatever. It's just one guest for 2 hours. So Adam Carolla, Adam Curry, Joe Rogan, Mark Maron, they were very early pioneers of the podcast. And I remembered when I started doing podcasts in 2007, 2008, it wasn't, we didn't even know that it was called that. It was just archives. We'd say, hey, we have our archive. Hey, go check out our on-demand archive at the time.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that what a podcast would be, but I knew its potential. That one thing radio was doing at the time, especially talk radio, was really putting people who moved out of your town at a disadvantage. For example, I live in Cleveland, Ohio. What's big here? Cleveland Browns football. The Browns currently have 2 wins on the season. Yet, for some reason, when the team is bad, people want to listen to them more. But there's a lot of people who don't want to live in Cleveland anymore. They live in places like San Diego, Los Angeles, Denver, places that are not in Eastern time zone. And for a long time, regular radio was basically like, oh, you missed the show today? You know, our big sports show? Well, looks like you're going to have to wake up early there, pal. And I kept thinking in sports radio, CBS radio at the time, I said, why are we punishing people who want to listen to us? They can't wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning
Yeah.
because jobs, family, or I don't know, normal people are not up at 3 o'clock to listen to two jackasses complain about the Browns from yesterday. Some did. I appreciated the ones who did. But I said, why can't we put our content out there for people who do miss it? And it was just tugging at it and just going nowhere until just a couple of years ago when you would have these program directors go, you know, I have a good idea. Why don't we put our stuff online? And so people don't miss content. So once again, just like with the internet, just like with MTV 2 decades prior to that, radio has always been a decade, maybe a decade and a half behind.
Yeah, and it's just weird because I don't know. I see these articles and it's like, oh, young people are still listening to the radio, but then it's like you look at the info and it's like, well, on the job site or in a truck where their older bosses are listening to the radio. I don't know one person under 27 who listens to the radio.
Nope.
I don't know one. And I'll talk to these Gen Z kids that I see, and they're like, oh, I listen to Spotify. And that's very worrisome for radio. And radio is just kind of suppressing it in that, but it's like, that's a problem.
Well, it's about fishing where the fish are. That was always my slogan is this is your station, this is your genre, this is your target demographic. I
Yeah.
understand if you're for example, I'll use a personal anecdote. My last full-time radio job was about 2.5, almost 3 years ago, where I was a
Yeah.
program director at a rock station, an alternative rock station. And I kept getting the consultant who was essentially the program director, and my job was just to get paid a couple of extra bucks than I used to and shut my mouth and just listen to him and go, okay, yeah, I guess I'll put this one on there. Yeah, I know a lot of people love hearing new Foo Fighters. And I thought, if I'm to program an alternative station, I would love for it to be where the people who still listen to radio are. Instead of thinking that you're going to get college kids to say, oh, hey, did you know there's a new rock radio station in town? It's you're really let them find it on their own, but how about you fish where the fish are? Why would you try to fish in a swimming pool? You fish in a pond. You have a better opportunity at catching a fish in a pond than a swimming pool. And yet we were fishing in swimming pools the whole time, wondering where the audience was. I knew where the audience was. Go after the Gen Xers. That's the last generation who is listening to regular radio still. And because of that, they want to hear old Green Day, Dookie Green Day. They want to hear Everlong by Foo Fighters. They want to hear Sweater Song and Say It Ain't So by Weezer. They want to hear the 90s, maybe some early 2000s. That's fine. Then you sprinkle a couple of new stuff in there. Hold the hand of the Gen Xers by saying, hey, I like this radio station. They play all of my old school stuff that I like the Butthole Surfers. Yet, I heard a new song by this one band that seems pretty cool. That's what you should do. Instead, we start playing new music and then sprinkle in a couple of old things. And I'm just bashing my head against the wall saying, this is why you have lost an audience. It's not because younger generations just say, you know, screw radio. It's you've drove them away as well.
Well, and everybody does these like market surveys, like, what song do you want to hear? And it's like, I don't know. It's like everything is so overthought. It's like it's not that deep. I don't know. It drives me nuts. Like they do these surveys and it's like we got to play these same 100 songs all day. And it's like that gets tiresome. I don't want to hear Enter Sandman 100 times a day, you know?
Well, that's the old school mindset. We're going really deep here for some of the listeners right now, but the P1 audience, if you're a radio station like one of those iHeart stations that have the mandatory Metallica on the weekends, but during the week you play a lot of Metallica. It's a P1. It's a very popular artist with the main listeners who not only will listen to your radio station, have it on their presets, but also buy your products. That's the main reason what it is the people who you are reaching out to are more likely to go to the local strip club and drink the beer that are sold on for radio advertising. So Metallica, the way they look at it is, I could play Call the Cthulhu which is a B-side from one of their early albums, or we play Enter Sandman. Well, their mindset is, if you play B-sides or if you play stuff that are not the biggest hits in the world, in their mind, the listener is going to tune out of that radio station, find something on a different station they may like, and never return to yours, which is thinking from that I would understand in 1986.
I don't know. It's just so like overthought, man. I don't know. I think about how much fun radio was before even I was born. And I think it has to do with that bill that Bill Clinton signed in like 95. I hear every Gen Xer go, that's what ruined radio. You know, do you
The
know which one I'm talking about?
Telecommunications Act of
Yes.
1996, yes.
Yes, that's what I hear. Every single Gen Xer goes, that's what ruined radio. Every time.
Well, it is, because at one time, in order for a radio company or for any broadcasting company, there was a time where you had a certain amount of stations that you can own in one given market, and it usually was an AM, an FM, and possibly a UHF or a VHF TV station. So the station you worked at for a little bit, WMMS, was owned
Yeah.
by Mallright Communications. Originally, by the way, MMS stood for Multimedia Stereo. But also some thought it was called Weed Makes Me Smile. So there was that.
I like that. I never knew that.
Oh yeah, they used that. That's more 70s boomers back in the day. Like, hey, what is cool? Like the buzzard. It's like getting a buzz, man. Ugh. Anyways, it was owned by Mallright Communications, which owned WMMS, WHK, a station I worked at briefly, and I think it was WOIO. So you had a TV station, and you can cross promote. Say, hey, at 4 o'clock we have The Adventures of Superman on today, and it was pretty good. But then by that time, when the deregulation hit, companies could just buy up radio stations all over the place. So there were local people. I actually happen to know a guy. He's not a big fan of me because, I'm a little too outspoken. But I've known him for a long time. He still does a show called the Mr. Not Cowhead, but he goes by Moohead. And his dad owned a bunch of radio stations in different markets. Again, not in one market, but he owned a station in Canton, Ohio, Binghamton, New York, Lansing, Michigan. Well, when deregulation hit, these stations all ended up getting bought by Clear Channel or J-Core, and then Clear Channel for maybe tens of millions of dollars a station. So he hasn't had to work in nearly 30 years. He just does podcasting and streaming because he wants to. It's something he was passionate about. He just cashed in on a really nice paycheck in the 1990s. And because they bought so many stations, they homogenized the product, and they overspent for them. So therefore, they had to start cutting staff here and there. And, we just saw a couple of weeks ago, iHeart had another round of mass layoffs, including people we actually know personally.
Yeah.
And you just, in my opinion, you look at that and say, I shrug my shoulders and go, this is what, if you want to work at iHeart, go for it. But you just know that the writing's on the wall. You're not going to have a job for probably, if you keep a job longer than 2 years, God bless you.
I know. I've had my beef with Bill Squire, just because he was all nice to my face, but then talked bad about me on air. But I don't even wish bad things upon my enemies. And when I saw he got laid off, I was like, that sucks, bro. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I don't, it's whatever. I mean, not many people who can work in iHeart, even if you're part-time most of it for 11 years and not do anything spectacular. But it's what I'm really obsessed with going forward in media in general. And it's two things that are related. One of them is just the media world changing with what we've seen with the podcast, what many people call the podcast election, and then AI. So you were mentioning you went to that morning show boot camp, and I assume they probably talked about these things called, there was Mr. Prep, there was Prep Burger.
Yeah.
And what these are prep services, not to be confused with the prep service that you get if you have HIV. But the prep service for radio producers was you would get there in the morning, and some overnight people who would get paid like $20 would aggregate material for you. So they would, oh, your sports station. Well, here are the top sports scores, and here's the Tyson Jake Paul fight, and here's the ring girl with the big boobs and everything. And they would condense all of that for you. So when you're a radio producer, you don't really have to do much show prep. You just print out stuff that they had already done for you. And I noticed the product getting lazier and lazier and even lazier now that we have automation and now that we have AI involved. And I can't imagine in the next couple of years when we're already seeing radio stations have AI jocks. Not they don't
I've
sound
noticed,
great,
yeah,
but they will
I've
sound
noticed,
better.
I've noticed a few shows would use those sites, but use it pretty well, being like BJ Shea in Seattle, and then Brother Weeze, and then this show called Paul and Young Ron in Miami. A few of the rock DJs that went to the boot camp were better at using those prep sites than like those shows with the fake prank calls, which when I worked at iHeartMedia, I talked about the local show in Tampa. I didn't talk about them specifically, but I had a female co-host at the time. This is going on 2 years ago. And I said that all the prank calls and dating segments are fake. And my boss calls me into his office, and I'm thinking I'm going in for a promotion. And he pretty much told me not to do that again. And that was the writing on the wall of my second time at iHeart, was exposing the secret that second date updates 100% fake.
It's and it's going to get worse even in TV. Like I think if you were hosting a talk show, you still need someone to put the show on the air unless you actually pay the host to run your own board and take your own phone calls. But or have Google take, because there's that Google Assist that takes care of some phone calls instead of the Telos machine.
Yeah.
Ultimately, at a radio station, if you're a music station, you don't even need jocks anymore. You can have AI, or you can just run it as an iPod, because nobody really, you're not getting the information. I used to like the DJs who would give out factoids about certain bands. They would say, did you know, hey, that was Foo Fighters with the Monkey Wrench, taking it back to 1997. Hey, did you know Pat Smear was once in a band, a punk band in the 1980s, with the drummer was Belinda Carlisle? Yeah, that's true. Look it up. Go check it out. Hey, it's 5:55. Let's go take a look at the weather. But you would at least have those factoids. I can find factoids if I want to. Or we had that music choice TV station that they would put factoids. So
I
we don't
missed
really
that.
even need DJs that much. So the business is changing, and traditional terrestrial radio, television, especially local television, and newspapers are kicking and screaming into this next generation. But I think this next generation is coming forward a little quicker than they were expecting.
I used to love newspapers until about maybe 2012. And then when Twitter's my newspaper, Twitter and just news sites, because I just can't stand the outdatedness. And it's not a newspaper's fault. It's just if you report something, there's going to be updates after you print that newspaper at 3 a.m. I used to love reading the newspaper every day growing up before I went to school. Like I would have my mom drive me to school and I'd be reading the back page of the Chicago Tribune or all these newspapers. And now I don't think I've read a newspaper in 12 years, 13 years.
It's convenience. I mean, I've been with my wife now. We've been together nearly 8 years. We have
Nice.
been to 2 movies. I think we've been to 2 movies. We saw the latest Jackass movie, and we recently saw, just because she went to a movie with one of her friends, she saw the new Twister movie. So I said, "Oh, okay." Well, and then she's like, "Oh, you got to go because it has recliners and the surround sound and the seats rumble and you get beer and all this." I'm like, all right, let's go see a movie. You got nothing to do on a Sunday, so we saw Deadpool Wolverine. Whatever. You go for the experience of going to a movie theater, but you're not going to the rom-com. You're only going to the movie theater for the quaint atmosphere of Star Wars movies, for taking the kids to see the Pixar movies or a Marvel movie. But you're not going there to see an actual movie. Those have now are not even movies anymore. They're TV shows that are strewn about over 8 to 12 episodes on Netflix or HBO Max. And that has changed. Newspapers, same way. Is there still a need for news, local news, national news? Sure. But if you want to do local news, it's not going to be very profitable anymore. You're probably going to get paid 25 bucks an article on a website. If you're working in television news, I mean, the days of making six figures as being a somebody on the news, being a talking head and reading a script that anyone from some jerk off producer to AI, you don't deserve that kind of money. And in fact, they might do multiple markets. They'll just put you in front of a green screen and say, "How's it going, St. Louis?" And you have the Gateway Arch in the background, and then it's like, "All right, we're done with that one. Okay, which one are we doing? Okay, we're doing
Yeah.
Detroit now. Hey, Detroit, what's going on? Hey, see the Ambassador Bridge behind me? It's like the Eminem video." So it's changing. They can't help it. But you and I, from being a younger generation and being a little bit more jaded when it comes to the business, have seen the writing on the wall for at least a decade, and it's finally coming to fruition.
Yeah, I try to just be positive as I can. I
I'm
very
not.
much, well, I keep to myself. The way I got burned a few times was I have daddy issues. Like me and my dad weren't the closest, and he never showed that he was proud of me to my face. He would tell people. So like when he died, I found out he bragged about me to everybody, but he never said it to me. So like when it came to some of the people I worked with, I get this weird dopamine hit. Not anymore, but if it was a radio show I was working on and they said they were proud of me, I would get this dopamine hit, feeling like, oh, the big show likes me or whatever. But then the problem with that is when you learn all the skills from the big show and it's time to leave the nest and do your own thing, that big show gets threatened. Like one of my close friends is Scott Farrell. I love Scott Farrell, and he texted me the other day.
Wait, can you do
I
a
was
Scott
asking,
Farrell impression for us?
take it up, Scott Farrell, CBS Radio.
It's Scott Farrell. It's on the
That's
bench.
better.
Scott Farrell. Hey, what's going on here, guys? The Knicks, boy, what a disaster they've been recently.
Yeah. He's the man. He told me he brings it every day and that he never reads negative comments. And I quit reading negative comments, and it's been the best feeling ever. But he told me, because I was asking him for some advice, and he was saying guys like Rover or Calta, they would never admit to this, but they're a little threatened whenever the person that worked under them begins to kind of shine on their own. So that's
Yes.
kind of been the reason why I really keep to myself. I go to the place that I record my show at, or I go to work, or I go to a kava bar, or I go to the beach, or whatever I'm doing. I don't even go to the beach that much, but like I don't go to public places where I might get recognized, because the show I worked on, 1 in 10 cars of dudes 25, 54 listen. So if I go to I went to a Mexican restaurant that's kind of like a dive place, but it has the best food. And I got recognized by this guy that I'll call a mutant. I call a lot of radio listeners mutants. And this guy was asking me about my breakup and that. And listen, when I say this, I'm not trying to sound cocky, but I totally get why Howard Stern does not leave his house, because he will be recognized everywhere and people will ask him things. I used to love getting recognized in public. Now it's kind of like it's cool, but as I've gotten older, I don't get that dopamine hit. And it's kind of like a lot of times they want to know. Here's the thing is a lot of times radio listeners don't want to admit that the shock jock they're listening to is a scumbag.
Yeah.
And the problem is they'll ask me, what is Kelta like? Or what is Rover like? Or what is this guy? And I'm like, what am I supposed to say? Like, they're business guys, they're successful, but they're not really good human beings. And it's
They're also not who they say. And I
yes,
always tell this to people and
yeah.
you've probably seen this as well. Who are the best people in radio to hang out with at a bar? It's the salespeople, because they're trying to sell you something, or they're already high on their own supply. They're doing coke, they're drunk or whatever. They're so much fun. But when they all come up to when in my years of radio and they say, "Hey, well, I'd love to hang out with so and so," and it's like, not really. You really want to hang out? This guy goes to bed at 7 o'clock. This guy's never.
You know who's cool to hang out with is the sidekicks of radio shows, like a Chocolate Charlie, if you're a Cleveland listener, or Dieter. Those are the people to hang out with. It's the people that are like second tier to the show.
Yeah.
A show host is never really cool to hang out with. There's a few examples, like I've said for the third time, BJ Shea in Seattle. There's a few of the guys that are super cool, but for the most part, the big dogs, they like, I think a lot of times they're sociopaths and they go into the business because sociopaths like attention and they think getting the attention is going to cure all their problems, but they're the same miserable prick that they were in the 80s or 90s when they were growing up. And the fame just, I've seen it, man. I've seen it where I've been on other podcasts of like shows that are like you work and you do well, but I've been on shows where it's just some random listener with an awful microphone and he's like, I bet it's so awesome being like a big morning show and like it's so awesome that you hung around them. And I'm like, really not. You get up at 4 a.m. They might be in a good mood. They might have had an argument with their wife last night. Their son might have been underage drinking. There's more to it. And the other thing is, if you work on a show, even if you're part-time, but you work on a show 4 to 5 days a week, that's 20 to 24 hours, which means you're spending one day with somebody. And a lot of times, if the company forces people to be together, that's where, like, I think that's what happened to Opie and Anthony is you spend so much time together that I've seen it with other shows I've worked on is it's almost a marriage and it's kind of crazy.
You're in a non-sexual relationship with your coworker, and what happens when you're with you let's say you're with a girlfriend and she's not putting out for a long time, you start getting frustrated. Well, if
Oh
you're not
yeah.
having sex with that person, you're going to get frustrated over certain things that bother you. And I've had that in the past with people I've worked with when I've been a producer or co-host of shows. It's honestly, as somebody who's not in the business, probably will never return to the business. I'm probably either blackballed or it's also for me, it's not worth it to take on a much lower paying job nowadays. Because I mean, that's what it was at one time. You get people who would go to those broadcasting schools, the Connecticut School of Broadcasting, Ohio School of Broadcasting.
Yeah.
They would go to these schools, which were all bullshit in the first place. You would spend $25,000 a year and the best you would get is an internship, or
Yeah.
you would be
And
able to mix your rap CD, which was going on a lot of
and
those places.
here's the BS about radio schools. I actually have a really good relationship with the what is it, OMS, Ohio Media School.
Yeah.
I have a better relationship with them because it's weird. This woman named Linda who runs it, she actually went to high school with my mom because my mom's from Lyndhurst. So I've always had the Cleveland connection. So I actually have a better relationship with the Cleveland location I didn't go to than the Illinois location because the Illinois location in 2013 and 14, I only went there because to get an internship at any show, you had to have college credits. You couldn't just show up. That was what ruined radio was the whole internship thing. But it's funny how my school got mad at me because I would get a tour of ABC7 or WGN News or Comcast Sportsnet because I would email the production director and be like, hey, can I get a tour? At my own radio school that I paid probably my uncle paid, but 17 to 20,000 to go to this school, maybe even 25, like you said, but I would pay to go to the school. And I was getting better tours with me and my old co-host, Super Rich, than the school was providing. I literally got on TV for 4 seconds on the WGN morning news just because I hit up this guy named Jeff Hoover, who's their producer. And that's the problem with radio schools is everybody gets threatened. And the biggest problem with radio schools, biggest problem is a lot of times you'll have the like star of the school who like has the typical radio voice or whatever, but they never make it in radio. But they go, hey, do you want to make 30K a year? Maybe that much to teach the kids. So what happens is you have a talented person teaching the kids, but they're not teaching them everything because they're afraid of a kid learning their skills. So you're kind of on a journey by yourself when you go to a radio school. I do think it's kind of worth it, maybe 10 years ago to learn Adobe Audition and board op skills. But now with YouTube and that, I don't know. It's just everything got so weird the last, I'd say, 7 years. COVID didn't help. The thing that totally didn't help, that totally ruined radio was COVID, where shows like Rover, Kelta, Stern, if they're not in studio. I've always said what I think made millionaire morning radio hosts relatable was they would have to drive in traffic. Rover would talk about driving in the snow and how it drove him nuts. Calton would talk about how a car crash at 4 a.m. drove him nuts. But when you're literally going from your second floor to your basement or your garage with this nice studio, you are completely out of touch with reality because you're not having to drive, you're not having to pay the gas money. And that's what hurt radio, was all the shows continuing to do it from home. The shows that are left, it's like a lot of these companies were afraid to tell them, no, come back in studio. That's what really made shows unrelatable, in my opinion, was working from home.
I think so too. I think it was really the death knell. I will say, during COVID, I was going in every single day to the
Me
radio
too.
station. There was nothing going on. I mean, it was nice. There was the one good thing. I was driving home during rush hour, and I didn't have to worry about any rush hour. I could
It
just
was
go
like The
home.
Walking Dead here in St. Pete. There'd be nobody on the road. It was crazy.
Yeah, the thing is with radio, and it's like this all across the board, because you're going to see this with TV very soon if it's not already happening. The the generation, the demographic who's keeping it alive for the time being is rapidly dying off. We know
I
this
know.
because in statistics showing that the older generation right now is the first generation in probably human history that is not outliving the previous generation or their parents. That you're seeing baby boomers and now Gen Xers are starting to die younger than their parents and grandparents were, because just what we put in our food, what we put in our bodies, what we eat, all this other garbage, smoking, drinking, and I'm here. I'm drinking a beer right now at 2:52 in the
I'm
afternoon.
smoking a Delta 8 vape right now talking to
Yeah.
you.
So we have our problems and stuff like that. So what happens is that demographic of baby boomers is going to start to die off. Well, when that dies off, so does the audience. And you're not seeing, like you said earlier, you're not seeing the 20-year-old college kid driving around in their car and going, huh, and finding the latest radio station. They're putting their podcast on, or they have Spotify, or they have YouTube Music or Apple
Or
Music.
Bluetooth turns it on right away. When I get into my Honda Accord, whatever I was listening to last immediately plays if I had my Bluetooth on last.
Correct. Same
And
with
the,
mine. And
the
and
other
that's just
thing,
the way of the world.
going back to your point about like boomers not living as long, my grandpa, who probably killed 50 people in World War II and was literally one of the soldiers in the undocumented last war of World War II, there
God
was
bless him.
there was a World War II. During World War II, there was a battle in Japan or something where they didn't know that the US won the war and they kept fighting, but they never got the names of the people. And there's a documentary about it and there's a book about it. And the way my grandpa broke down everything was exactly what happened. So he was at that war. And to me, the great generation, that generation born in the 20s and 30s, they were so tough because it was like they literally were robbed of their 20s and early 30s and maybe even teenage years fighting this war, where boomers kind of had everything given to them. And I try not to hate on boomers because my mom and my family that I have remaining are boomers. But my God, man, to me, the worst boomers are the ones at the airport. Whenever I have to like fly home to Illinois, they're always like just blocking the aisle. And they like I was at the Tampa airport, and let's say my gate was Q17 or something. It said Q17 on the gate. It said Q17 on both TVs, and on this woman's smartphone, it said Q17, whatever the gate number was. And she's blocking the aisle to get onto the plane. And she says to everybody, "Is this Q17?" And it was like, yes, get on the fucking plane.
Yeah.
Throw me nuts.
Yeah, is when I look at A, B, C, is C the window, or is that the aisle seat?
Tony, it was so obvious that it was Q17 or whatever it was. And I was like, and then this guy was texting this bald boomer prick, like, and I'm like, dude, you're blocking the lane. But the thing about ABC is true. I've had to tell boomers, hey, man, I need to sit in the aisle because I'm so tall. Yeah. I try not to hate on boomers because it can be a little hack. But my God, sometimes they just. I worked at a conservative radio company for 6 months from November to May this year, and my goodness, it's not because of the conservative party or that they were religious, but they were all in their 70s and they just came from this time where I'll never forget. There was this afternoon host. This is how out of touch boomers can be. And he had good messages. I'm not really religious, but I appreciated the good word he said. But he said, we should help out the homeless community in Tampa Bay. You know what we should do? We should all go to McDonald's and get a $5 gift card and pass it out. And I'm like, bro, you can barely get a meal for $5. Like, just like the way they had all their opportunities, Tony, it doesn't drive me nuts because I don't want to be bitter, but the boomers literally had everything. Everything.
Yeah, and that's what's going to happen is that when they go away, what's going to happen to, well, what's going to happen to a lot of these homes that are insanely expensive right now, if they're not selling them all to BlackRock, but that's a completely different story.
Yeah, of course.
As far as media goes, because if the boomers start dying off, you're not this election, and I'm not getting into the politics of it, but it's pretty obvious why things changed a lot is the two candidates, the old guy and the younger, darker skinned woman who ran in the Democrat Party, they did not embrace the new technology that's available right now. And people can say whatever they want about Trump, and many have for the last decade, is that whoever was advising him this time around about going on Theo Von's podcast, going on Joe Rogan,
I think it was Barron.
I think it was too. I think it was brilliant. His son Barron and his advisors.
I love that point.
Yeah,
I love that point because I don't know. I read so much information that I don't know if I'm Mandela affecting this or if this is a real story. But what I think I saw on the internet was that he held like an event or something with Barron and his friends at Mar-a-Lago or something, or he had some meeting with these Gen Z and he's like, what podcast do I need to go on? And that was brilliant of him because Kamala didn't want to go on Rogan because it wasn't what she wanted. But then she went on The View and she went on Stern and she went on Colbert because they were kissing ass. But what I thought, and I'm indifferent about Trump. I don't like him. I don't hate him. I lean more towards liking him. But what he did that was brilliant was he gave Theo Von the 2 hours. He gave the Full Send podcast, Logan Paul. He gave Rogan. He went on whatever he needed to do. I think he even probably would have gone on Stern if Stern would have done it. Like, Trump is probably the greatest marketer of all time. Jake Paul is the best Gen Z marketer, but I've known Trump's name since I came out of my mom's womb in 1993. Like, that guy is, and I honestly, he kind of influenced me a little bit since he ran for president in 2015, because that's when I began Hoppe Hour and really my own brand of having Hoppe on all the things I do, because everything he does is Trump, Trump, Trump. And people can say whatever they want to say about Trump, but he has done an amazing job in marketing that 5-letter last name. 10 out of 10 job.
It's true. I mean, and here's the funny thing about it is Donald Trump is a boomer. Yet Donald Trump has the wherewithal and he has the people around him to tell him to kind of read the tea leaves. You can't just be a presidential candidate and get interviewed on 60 Minutes. That you're going to have to embrace this new generation of people who want to hear more from you. And the fact that Trump is going on with Theo Von and Theo's talking about how, he can't do cocaine, but alcohol is what gets him to that level. And Trump, who doesn't drink because his brother was a horrible addict. Yeah. Like, I've never drank a beer. I've never had any of that. I've certainly not done drugs. What's that like? It was a human moment. Or when he's on with Rogan talking about UFC and talking about the great heavyweight boxers of the 1980s that used to be at Trump Plaza. So Trump got to know these guys and he's asking personal questions. You don't see that from politicians like a Kamala Harris by her asking, that's kind of interesting. Look, so even if it's just a simple question, that's what worked out. And right there should be a way for media people to understand that Gen X swayed this election. They're still Zoomers and millennials kind of voted Democrat and boomers cared about Democrats and whatever, but Gen Z by and large voted for Donald Trump. So again, not saying anything politically here, it's Gen X will become the boomers in a couple of years. Gen X, I think
about that a lot.
Gen X is anywhere between 40, 45 and 65 at this point. So
I'm obsessed with demographics. I'm obsessed. A lot of times people don't even know what generation they're in. I'm actually a zillennial because it's 92 to 97. And what makes a zillennial is I can relate to 25-year-olds, but I can also relate to a 36-year-old. But the thing that I noticed the cutoff with Gen Z that makes them different, if you were in high school during COVID, so like the people that were born in 2000 that are 24 that graduated in 2017, 18, or 19, they can be normal. The kids that graduated in 20, 21, 22, or even 23 or this year, there's a cutoff where it gets weird. Like the 02, 01 babies, it's different than the late 90s, early 2000s babies.
Oh yeah. And also the other big difference is because I look at my niece who was born in October of 2007, meaning she's a junior in high school and getting ready to head to
Yeah,
college. But what came out about, oh, 3, 4 months before she was
iPhone.
born? There was this little thing that I'm holding in my hand called the iPhone. And to think about generations now that are graduating high school and going to college and now graduating college, because, you know, you don't really have many memories before you're 5 years old. These are people who have never lived in a world without YouTube, without some kind of audio player like a Spotify, social media. I mean, yeah, when we were growing up, we had AOL Instant Messenger, which was the early form of social media, or you had Zanga and MySpace and everything, very archaic versions, but they have never lived in a world where we don't have that access to an Instagram,
Well,
where Googling it is a verb now. Oh, just Google it. Even if you're not using Google, that's what you call it.
well,
That
you know what's funny? It's not really funny that we had two hurricanes in Tampa, but the second hurricane took out like 1.5 million people in Florida that didn't have power. And a lot of these Gen Z were like freaking out. And I actually I didn't like the power being out, but there was something nice about the internet being slow. It felt like it was 2005 again. I was listening to music offline. It's I wish technology would not have gone past 2012. To me, 2012 was the perfect. You had the mobile apps, but you didn't have, it just was like a good year for tech. But then around 2015, 16, 17, when Facebook Live came around, that's when things really changed because Periscope was the greatest thing ever. And then it was robbed by Facebook Live. It makes me mad. I used to kill it on Periscope. I loved Periscope.
Well, and then the same thing happened with Snapchat, is that Snapchat was really rising up, and then all of a sudden, Instagram started doing stories. And then when Instagram stories came out, it's like, uh-oh, game changer, that's a
Well,
Snapchat killer.
you know
And it
what's funny
basically
though
was.
about Snapchat, and I know you're a married man, but the thing that is cool about Snapchat is a lot of Gen Z girls don't want to give out their number right away, but they're like,
Yes.
talk to me on Snapchat. And there's girls that when I was hooking up with them or whatever, I never had their number, but I would just hit them up on Snapchat and it's pretty immediate. So to me, Snapchat died, but it's just remaining for another way to communicate with people. Like if it didn't have the chat feature and it was just pictures, Snapchat would be dead. But Snapchat is still relevant just because of the chat feature.
Yeah, that's true. It's taken on a different meaning, and it's kind of like what Vine, for example. Vine was around 2013, 6 second videos. So what do
I
you do
didn't
in
like
six?
Vine.
What do you do in 6 seconds? You just, hi everybody, I'm at the beach today. This is a great day. You hear the waves crashing behind me? Oh, I got to wrap it up now.
Bro, I did a video like that. Did you go on my Vine archive? When I was at Northwestern University, it was right on the water and there was like rocks and there were waves. And I said, the waves are crazy. I'm about to be on the radio. That was literally one of my videos.
No, I didn't know that, but
It's
it's funny
funny.
because what you would do is you can be dumb and say absolutely nothing in 6 seconds, or you can do something completely brilliant, and that's now on TikTok. So it's everything that was around just evolved, as we have seen now. The newspaper evolved into blogging, into the internet. That instant messaging kind of gave way to the text messaging and the Snapchat and
Yeah, it
everything
did.
like that. So everything that the tenets of what we have right now, that what we are talking to right now, when I put this out and people are listening to it, it's on a podcast. A podcast is nothing more than an offshoot of a radio show. It's just a radio show that doesn't have commercials, and we can curse, and we can go for however long or short that we want to. So it's an evolution. It's not even devolving, it's evolving. And I think the powers that be, when those industries start to adapt to a new generation, go kicking and screaming. I knew friends of mine. I actually had a friend of mine who worked at a newspaper back in around 2009, 2010, just a local yokel newspaper. Well, this was a time where you were still having those old school journalists that did a column and did a story, maybe two, but usually one column a day. And they would turn it in, and that would be it. They would either do it at the office, or they would mail it in, or whatever that was. Then they said, okay, we have to set you up with an email account. I don't know what this email is. Well, email actually works out better because now you can work from home and you can type, so you don't have to keep coming into the office. And we'll edit it, and it will. Oh, that's perfect. So then they got really used to that for like a decade or so, until the company said, you're going to have to do a little more than just a column a day to justify. It's either we lay you off right now or force you into an early retirement, or you're going to have to do, instead of a column, you'll have to do 2 or 3 columns. Am I going
And
to get
that
paid more?
that
No.
also goes with radio. People don't realize, I'll see a lot of times somebody that works at iHeartMedia will be like, I just got a new shift doing afternoons in Chattanooga. And people will be like, I bet the money's great. And I'm like, no, they're still making 50K. They're not getting a bump in that
And they ain't getting
new
50K
voice
anymore
tracking.
either.
Some, a few are, but a lot of them probably were the ones that just got laid off. I don't know anymore.
You're just not going to make that kind of money. That they're going to basically split people's salaries. So if you want to work in radio still, God bless you. You want to be a DJ, you think you're really good and you had a good booming voice, or you have a very distinct personality that you can really drive home. Um, you have to push the personality aspect to it. You have to be very good on social media. I remember, by the way, I'll tell a quick story. I don't think I've ever really told this. Not that it's interesting, but
Ooh,
my last
I
station
want to
when I
hear
was
this.
last station when I was a program director,
Yeah,
uh, I put it out there on All Access, which is the Bible for a lot of radio people, and I put
I
a whole
missed that
thing.
website.
And it is even still around.
No, it's out of business.
It's gone. Okay, yeah.
100% gone.
There's Friday Morning Quarterback, all these other douchebag bloggers and stuff like that. But All Access was around, and it was the radio place where you would go see what's trending in the music world, what people are talking about. Then they would have the job forum. And so I finally got to a level. I'm the big boss right now, and I'm the program director. And I put like, "Hi everybody, I'm Tony Mazur. I'm the program director at such and such radio station, and I'm looking for a strong whatever the same old garbage you would see.
I
I'm looking for
remember
a
seeing
strong
that.
personality to
I remember seeing
ma-
that.
yeah, to manage our afternoon show and be active on our Facebook page and give away and go to concerts and stuff like that. Send me your demo and resume and stuff like that." So I got flooded with a lot of people I knew personally, and I told the people personally, I'm like, you don't want this job, trust me.
Well, you know
But there
what's
was, what's
yeah,
that?
sorry. No, sorry, go on.
I think you applied actually.
I applied. Was that the one in Akron?
Yes.
I remember you must be talking about the friend saying, or I must have been the friend that you told not to apply to, because I applied for it.
There were
and
several, and you were one of them. Yes.
I DM'd you and you were like, stay in Florida, do not come to Akron or something. I was like, wow.
and it's not for any selfish reasons. I'm looking out for friends. I'm looking out for people, and it wasn't worth it. But I did. There was a girl that I had hired to do afternoons, or I did. I think she did evenings at this time, and
Yeah.
she was a girl that she did some small town radio, and I liked her name, I liked her voice, and I liked her bubbly personality. Like she was just when she walked in the room, you knew everything about her life within 5 minutes. She told you everything about her dating life and her previous married life and her dog and where she's living and her commute to work. And I'm like, okay, I can't really, that's cool, whatever. But you're perfect for the radio. You have that engaging personality. And my bosses at the time said, she's top 40. She's not really that good. Maybe a
Ugh.
part-time role, but don't hire her full-time. And I said, she's got tattoos. She's got kind of like a cool rock chick voice that, you want to give this, maybe this is old school Tony, but old school radio vision of I wanted a nighttime rock chick that you would almost like a guy can sit around like, playing pocket pool with himself, going like, "Ooh, she's got a really sexy voice. I can't wait to listen to this chick
But
tonight."
that's what radio did,
Yeah,
was it took chances.
and that's
And
what
like, yeah,
and that's what I did is I stuck my neck out and I said I would really like her for this position, and they did hire her. Within a year, she's winning awards for like best personality in
who is
Cleveland.
it?
She's Her name is Carrie.
Okay, I think I've heard of her.
Yeah, and she's very active on social media. People follow her. She does events at the local the music venues and stuff, and she's just a really fun person. And I really like her. Like everybody else there, doesn't talk to me anymore, but that's okay. I get it. I'm too toxic for people. I get that people don't want to talk to me, but the whole thing with that was I wanted to take a chance on somebody instead of regurgitating the same personalities that people have heard for decades. How about we give a fresh voice, a fresh face, a fresh personality? And that's the problem with dinosaur traditional media would always just go with the name brand, the name recognition. And it bothered me that these businesses and these industries just chose not to go in that direction.
You know what's crazy? I just Googled this because you were talking about like dinosaurs, and the person I'm about to bring up, I have a lot of respect for, but this is a case of radio not growing talent. Guess how old Elvis Duran is?
I know he's in his 60s.
He's 60. Dude, I mean, I have so much respect for Elvis. Out of all the shows that do fake prank calls, I think he's the best at it. I do like Elvis, but he's 60. Where's the next Elvis Duran? Where's the next I don't know any of it.
How about Bobby Bones? How about that as an example?
You want to hear should I say it? Screw it. This is all alleged. This is totally not true. But in a world where this might be true, Bobby Bones was hired with no experience of knowing anything about country music. But that's just alleged. That's not true.
I wouldn't be surprised because I've known several people who've got.
He was allegedly doing mornings at Kiss FM in Texas, and he heard a show in Seattle. I'll leave that part nameless. And he was going for a job in Seattle, and he heard a show in Seattle. So, yeah.
Is Bones his last name? Is that a Christian name?
No, I think it's Bobby Estelle or something. He's actually not a bad guy. I've met him twice, but
I'm sure he's fine. It's just what happens is country radio has done the Bob and Tom method of, hey, we have an opening and we could pay these two local personalities to talk about things going on locally and whatever that are in the community. Or we can just go in the bird and find Bob and Tom. And that's what country radio is doing all over the place. We could have a local personality, but we're going to put Bobby Bones on in the morning.
I never got Bob and Tom. That was the only show I never got.
I'm going to defend Bob and Tom. I know our buddy Chad Zumach does not. We got banned from Bob and Tom for.
I respect them. I don't get it.
I respect them. Here's why I got it. It was a Midwestern. They were very so. As far as the show goes, the distribution is easy because you'd have a 1,000-watt radio station and you just put that as a morning show. They were really cheap to syndicate. As far as Indianapolis goes, it was, hey, we got a morning zoo comedy team here in this time slot in the middle of the country. But Indianapolis was a burgeoning market in the 1980s. They eventually got the Colts that came over from Baltimore, and it's a capital city. So, and there's really not much in that region of the country. It's Columbus, Ohio, then it's Indianapolis, then what, St. Louis? There's really not much. So if you're a band, if you're a comedian, if you're an author and you're going through town on a tour stop, it makes sense to go to the Bob and Tom show in the middle of the country.
Oh, no, for sure.
The show itself was basically the fake laughter, the fake voices that they've had, the grading personnel on the show, like Chick McGee and whoever else that they've trotted out there as a co-host, it's terrible. But
You know what
what they
they
would
were
do is
good
they would
at?
also have the comics come on there and do their bits. So by the time you go see them at Bananas and in Go Bananas in Dayton, Ohio, um, they're like, well, hey, boy, I was taking the plane over here. I take that
Yeah.
Spirit Airlines. They're like, oh, I heard him do this bit yesterday on the Bob and Tom show. How did I know that? Because I just won tickets to this friggin'
Well,
comedy
yeah,
club.
it's that. The thing they did very well is they had good banter. There was a few times I used to me, my mom, and my dad would drive. We would drive 12 hours because we didn't want to pay for plane tickets to go to North Carolina to see my grandma growing up. And we would do the whole Midwest drive and we would go through Indianapolis and I would be like, let's put on Bob and Tom. And the thing I liked about them was when they would talk about the news and just shoot the shit, kind of like what Opie and Anthony did. They do deserve credit for that, especially when I think it was Christy Lee was doing the news. I didn't like any of the skits, but the banter back and forth, those guys hated each other, but knew each other very well. I'll give them that. Was that when they were just talking normally and not doing the fake laughter and not doing the comedians and not doing the skits, they were pretty good. But it was the douchiness was when they were playing their own skits and laughing at their own skits, the things that they made. What are
Yeah.
you doing?
Yeah, and they would have Bob Zaney come on, and they would have Donnie Baker, who just died recently.
Yeah,
The the thing with Opie and Anthony is it took it to a new level because Opie and Anthony started out as one of those shows. People forget
yeah, they
that when
did.
they were at WAAF, they were playing in between Bush and Everclear songs,
Yeah,
and
they
they would
were.
do kind of conventional of the time radio banter until they got to New York, realized they can't do that anymore. That why not do what Howard Stern does, but have it be a little bit more natural? And then eventually Jim Norton comes on, and then he brings a bunch of the comics like Patrice O'Neill, Bill Burr, Rich Voss, Bob Kelly, and it worked because it was a hang. It was you felt that when you listened to the Opie and Anthony show that sure they set it up, sure they have commercials, sure they have guests on, but you just knew that it felt loose, but it didn't feel unprepared. And that's what made it great, and why someone like this guy named Joe Rogan was going on there and preferred being on Opie and Anthony over Howard Stern because he's like,
He literally has admitted, I think it was when he had Anthony on, that that's the reason he's doing the show. It's
correct.
literally a spin-off of O&A, but just
It's
a little
it's
different.
and I've told this to people who still don't get podcasts and they don't get Joe Rogan's impact. And here's what I tell them. I said, here's the thing. Joe Rogan took that concept of let's put a microphone or a camera or however he was doing the podcast like 15 years ago with Justin TV, and
I remember that.
that's all he did is he's there with the cigar or he's smoking a joint and he's got Ari Shafir, Burt Kreischer, Tom Segura, and it's just like let's shoot the shit, let's talk, let's have a good time. And there was nothing wrong with that. And that was the appeal was you didn't know what you're getting yourself into. You just knew it's a guy who was a pretty well established actor, comedian, and presenter
He
who
literally began as a janitor on a sitcom. Think about that
correct.
journey.
Well, and as a pitcher on a short-lived baseball, I think it was called Hardballs, was the TV show before news radio.
I think I saw a commercial for it one time because my dad taped the Super Bowl that Steve Young won, whatever
Yes.
year it was, and he had it on VHS, and I remember seeing that in the commercial. So yeah. But the thing with Rogan is he's relatable while being really rich. He does the thing that Stern does, which is he doesn't brag about his wealth. I can't stand when radio shows brag about their wealth. It makes me want to throw my phone through the radio or whatever. I can't stand when people
I did
brag
like
about their
when
money.
Anthony would do it ironically.
It was funnier where he's like, I got a mansion and I got a pool. He was funnier about it, but there's some shows, Bubba the Love Sponge, when they had money,
Yes.
that it's like, my God, nobody cares.
Yeah, the when I tell people about that appeal with Joe Rogan, it's Joe Rogan's not an intellectual. He's a well-read guy, and and he likes having interesting conversations with interesting people across all interesting spectrums. And There's sometimes he could have Joey Diaz on, who I normally like, but sometimes I'll listen to a podcast and it's, oh, dog, when I was hanging out in Boulder and we were,
Yeah.
all right, I've heard him tell that story. But then he'll have some horticulturalist on and I go, maybe I'll skip this one. And I listen and go, wow, that's fascinating. It's a great interview. And yes, there's a reason why he has that influence to the point where his podcast may have swung an election. And
It did.
that's where we're at right now. And that's why traditional media has to get in line. They have to see the writing on the wall. And if they're not, they will die that very, very painful, quick death here.
So I'm not a big fan of Rogan, but I respect him. But the podcast that really influenced me, because I listened to him when he did mornings in Los Angeles, was Adam Carolla. I loved, and I still love Adam. I just think he's the best. Do you like
Yeah.
Adam?
I do. I saw him attempt stand up. It wasn't very good, but
Well, he's the poor guy's having to do it because he had a divorce.
oh, is that why he had to?
And he
get a
also,
couple
because he's
bucks?
doing like comedy shows in Fargo, but making good money. And then also he lives in LA and then he's got a daughter and a son that are going to college. So I think that's more paying the bills thing.
But he was a guy that he was an early investor because he knew his radio career, which, as I think a lot of people remember, that in 2006, after Howard Stern went over to Sirius, that his stations were taken up by three different shows. East Coast was David Lee Roth. Ugh. Middle of the country was Rover's Morning Glory. And then the West Coast was Adam Carolla, which I would have listened to. It's just, again, it's West Coast. And by the time his morning show was on, I'm already started my day working or at school
I
or
was
whatever it
listening to
was.
the podcast every day of that show. And when I went to LA in 2008 to visit my uncle, I listened. It was some of the best radio ever. It was 10 out of 10. He was happy. He was young. Life hadn't, there was a certain vibe to it that was just magnificent. And I followed him through the podcast. I remember the first episode of him recording in his garage. He's the man. He's definitely one of the biggest impacts on me in my life of him, Opie and Anthony, and some guys from Chicago. But Adam Carolla, like I helped make his movie Road Hard. I donated $20 and got a book and a T-shirt. Like I'm an Adam fan.
Yeah, I've always respected him, and when he was doing his radio show and knew it wasn't going to be renewed, he was already investing in a podcast.
Yeah, he was.
What's the network that he had? It was the Adam Carolla podcast network.
Carolla Digital.
Yeah, something like that. And he had a couple of different shows, including the Big Three with Perry and Don and Mole. But a lot of it was knowing that what's the next step going to be? What is and I think for a lot of people it is uncertain. And we see what's going on right now of streaming shows and super chats and what we're doing with podcasting. Will this be around 10 years from now, 5 years from now? I don't know. I'm willing to adapt to a new generation of the I don't have TikTok. I understand it
TikTok.
exists. I see videos, but
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm getting to the age where I don't really feel like signing up to a social media site, especially if I don't have children.
I got a funny story for you. So I had a TikTok with 2,500 followers because I was dating a Gen Z girl, and she got me into it around 2021. And this is all alleged, but I had a co-host that I was trying to do an Opie and Anthony vibe with, and it ended up ruining my friendship, kind of similar to O&A. So we kind of became like a podcast O&A. He was a local nightclub DJ. I don't know if you ever saw my posts. His name was David. And he was a typical 40-year-old that's a South Park nerd that thinks that whatever is said on TV should be said on a podcast. And we were getting about 500 views a reel on TikTok. And I didn't know what this meant when he said it, but we were playing Mia Khalifa talking about things going on overseas. And he said she should be gangbanged by Hamas. And I got like 7 strikes by 7 different accounts for sexual violence. And I didn't know what that meant on TikTok. And then TikTok gave me maybe 5 views for the rest of my time. So I deleted the account in May when I began the show by myself, and then ended up joining podcast radio. And then I began my account 2 weeks ago, and now it's doing well. I only have like 40 followers, but any of your listeners are on it, it's Ryan Hoppe Radio. And it's doing well because it's like I'm starting over. And I'm actually kind of glad that my show didn't take off with that guy, because we probably would have been canceled, because he was like a diehard Opie and Anthony fan. And he like almost was doing a creepy impersonation of Anthony because he was a womanizer. So he was talking about, oh, I'm up till 4 a.m. and blah, blah, blah. And it's just, I've noticed whenever somebody tries to be their hero, if their hero has flaws, they end up having those same flaws, if that makes sense.
Well, yes. Well, and it's what it's about is finding your voice. And we all do that. We all do that early on in our careers. My first couple of years in radio, if I go back and listen to them, I can hear it's still me, but there's a lot of Jim Norton in there. There's a lot of Anthony Cumia. There's a
lot
lot
of
of
Anthony,
Jackie
yeah.
Martling and Howard Stern in there. And eventually you find your voice. You find who you are as a broadcaster. It's like this in comedy too. Bonnie McFarlane has talked about this, that it's probably a decade. You have to be in comedy a full decade for you to finally find your voice in comedy. You go on stage in your first year or two, you're going to get laughs, sure, if you're good enough. But are you good enough where it's genuinely you? Is it you, or are you influenced by Louis C.K.? Are you influenced by Shane Gillis? Are you influenced by these very popular comedians? Eventually you start writing your own material that's in your voice. You find your footing. And it's like that with broadcasting. It's like that with writing as well. So, you know, I guess it's tough for somebody who's a little older, who's influenced very heavily to do that. You kind of figure that out in your 20s. Same with bands. Bands will do that. You get on at your local bar and grill, and you get paid $100 for the show, and you're doing a lot of covers. Sure, you'll do something else, but one of your own stuff is going to sound like a lot of who influenced you. Oh, you're a big Led Zeppelin fan? That kind of sounds very Zeppelin-y to me. So eventually it takes a little bit to go, oh, that is genuinely me. And it takes a while, and that's why I'm happy to have a podcast. And I know you're happy to have a podcast where it gives you an opportunity to work on things. The best part is we don't go live, so we can start over. Oh, I don't like how this sounded. Oh, the first 5 minutes, I didn't have enough energy. I'm going to start over.
You know what drives me
Gives us
nuts?
that luxury.
I want to go live on some form, but here's the problem. I have like my show is a radio show and a podcast. So I'll play like a 4-minute rap song to take a break or whatever. And I play unlicensed music from like 18 years ago that's not like copywritten. So I can play it like some Lil Wayne mixtape. But what I'm saying is I have rejoiners. And when I do my podcast, the rejoiners are out of my Apple Music library on my laptop that I connect to the board. And I have like different playlists where it's like rejoiner, sweeper, whatever. And if I play one of those different sweepers, it'll begin playing it like 3 seconds in. So then I got to start it over and then write down what time it skipped. And I've asked ChatGPT, I've asked Reddit why it's doing this, and nobody has an answer. There's some glitch where it doesn't begin every single file from the beginning, and it's driving me mad. But it's the only reason I don't go live in some form is I can't go live and have a sweeper play twice. It drives me mad, but it's such a first world problem.
Yeah, it's I mean, we're in a I feel like there's a changing of the guard right now when it comes to
Yeah.
media, and I'll look. Yeah, if you're not excited about what's going on going forward, then you may as well just retire and just work in construction or something. So I'm looking
I don't
forward
want to
to
do
it.
that.
Well, I'm not in construction, but I will say it. I What I'm doing right now at my normal day job, I'm making way more money than I probably made more money this year than I've made in like 7 years of radio. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not bragging. I'm just saying I had my fun job. My fun job just didn't pay. It had cool perks. Oh yeah, you get to go to this luncheon. You get to meet this celebrity. You get to hang out at this tailgate. And then you look at the paycheck and go, Boy, that did not crack four figures. So that's not very good. How am I going to pay my bills this month? But hey, I'm glad I got to hang out with Jerry Rice last night.
Yeah, I feel
So
that.
then when I'm lucky to have the boring job that pays a lot more now, and it gives me the luxury of doing this. And this podcast is called the Check Your Brain Podcast. Thank you everyone for listening. Ryan Hoppe, my guest this week, my good pal for the last 10 years now. Hoppe Hours is the name of the podcast. Where can we find you on social
Uh,
media?
I say this in every single post I make. Search HOPPE Radio on all the platforms. HOPPE Radio. And if you are on TikTok, it's Ryan Hoppy Radio. Let's give me some more followers there.
Let's do it. Let's do it. And yeah, go check him out. And he is Chad and I have talked about this, and we don't do so insultingly. We just say that Ryan is the ultimate radio nerd. That there's
I had a YouTube comment of somebody saying that you guys were talking smack, but I was like, it doesn't sound like
no,
people don't get jokes, I think.
no. What we would do is we would bring up an obscure thing from radio, and we'd say, "Well, I think the only other person who would know this is probably Ryan Hoppe, the ultimate radio nerd." That would
That's
be
what I
it.
hate about the internet was when I saw that comment, I was like, it doesn't sound like them.
No, that's all it was. And I can send you, I can go back in time
Bro,
of
it's
playing it.
fine.
And it was
It
always,
was just
anytime we would
funny.
mention you,
Yeah.
it would be in a way where it's like, there's some obscure guy who was a board op at, you know, uh, WLUP in Chicago in, 1991. And we're like, well, the only other person on the planet is probably Hoppy who knows that. So that's the
That's
only
what I
way we
hate
would
about the
say that.
internet. That's why I took Scott Farrell's advice to not read any YouTube comments. I will read tweets and Facebook comments, but I have like 30 comments from like angry people and I don't read it because it's honestly been the best decision I've ever made. My mental health is a lot better because you start to get mad because you're like, that's not a fair comment. And you're not supposed to let it get to you, but we're all human. So if anybody's out there and wondering some good advice, don't always read the comments, especially on YouTube. YouTube comments are the worst.
Oh yeah, yeah. I did. Yeah, I could go into it, but not worth the time. But I appreciate you for coming on, and I
Of
appreciate
course,
you
bro.
folks for listening to the podcast. Make sure you go to patreon.com/Tony Mazur, TonyMazur, if you want more content from me. Otherwise, I'll have another free episode of the Check Your Brain podcast coming up for you next week. Thank you everybody for listening, and again, see you next week, right before Thanksgiving. And actually, you know what? Next week's podcast, I'm going to give my big review of the Creed concert that I'm about to go see. Oh
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
it's Creedmas, ladies and gentlemen. Happy Creedmas to those who celebrate.